Okay, everyone, this is chapter 18, and this is a huge chapter. So rather than try to go through it sort of blow by blow, I want to kind of skim through a couple of things and focus on what I think for you should be the most important uh, stuff that you pay attention to and read and take notes on. So we're going to do that real quick. This chapter starts off by taking us towards the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. Ordinarily, we would probably spend a little bit more time on this, but I'm going to try to sum it up as best I can and try to get you to think what you ought to be seeing in this. It begins with the scientific revolution, where we shift and change from the accepted view of the universe, which dated all the way back to the Middle Ages, to a new scientifically founded view of the universe that runs through these various scientists that you see here: Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, Descartes, Newton. We transform our view of the universe based on science. We transform our view of the universe from the medieval view of the cosmos, which was earth-centered, everything in perfect circles, everything only touched by God, espoused by the church, to one that is based on math and reason. So as you read through this, make sure that you understand what each of these does, okay? Copernicus is the first to challenge the geocentric model and change us to a heliocentric model. Kepler proves mathematically, based on all of the data that was accumulated by the Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe, that planets move not in perfect circles, but in ellipses, and they speed up and slow down too. Galileo, using the telescope, found out that things orbit other bodies rather than moving around, in the old model, the Earth, and in the newer model, the Sun, in these perfect circles. Descartes is deductive reasoning and taught us that we can remove doubt and get to a foundation of learning, which is that we exist and we can think. Newton gives us basically the physics of the natural universe, that three laws of motion, the law of universal gravitation, which makes us understand that there is a universe out there that works according to natural laws. The outgrowth of that is the Enlightenment, where you have philosophers who take what had been built in the scientific revolution and began to apply it to the natural world, to us, through reason. And the Enlightenment is all about applying that same kind of scientific, reasonable thought to the world around us. And a lot of these guys, for example, talk about human institutions, whether it be governments, whether it be economies. Okay, Locke talks about how we learn. All right, if you're an education major, you learn about Locke's tabula rasa, that we're born blank. We're born as a blank slate, but that we build our knowledge through experience. But he also talks about government and argues that we're basically good and that we can govern ourselves. And he's a big fan of what the British did during the Glorious Revolution. Montesquieu argues, who's French, argues for separation of powers in government, as he struggles under a type of government that's absolute. So was Voltaire. Okay, Diderot publishes the Encyclopedia. Adam Smith talks about laissez-faire economics. State should not interfere in the economic world. Rousseau, social contract. Okay, all of these, and even Mary Wollstonecraft, who will argue for women being involved in this as well. They all are arguing and applying scientific thought to the world around us. So here is a list, basically, of Enlightenment thinkers that you ought to know what they do and how they fit into the Enlightenment. The next section sort of deals with, the next chapter is about the Industrial Revolution. So you're going to learn a little bit about cottage industries, about how the goods are made mostly in the home, then they are sold either in local villages or used or bartered or whatever. But there's a movement towards commercialism and capitalism. And that's why really the thoughts of Adam Smith, who's talking about laissez-faire economics and about free trade, are important. The agricultural revolution predates the Industrial Revolution, where we learn new techniques about farming. We start applying technology to farming, and we end up with more people who had been farmers suddenly finding themselves not necessary. If you become more efficient in farming, then lots of farmers are no longer needed. They're going to provide the backbone for the working class later, especially in England. In certain parts of the world, a lot of agricultural labor is still being done in the late 1700s, early 1800s by enslaved labor, whether it's the British possessions in the West Indies, France's possession in Haiti, Martinique, Guadeloupe, here in the United States, cotton production in the American South is still being produced by enslaved labor in the early 1800s. So one of the labor systems that's in place in the world in the early 1800s is still enslaved labor. The colonies here in America, the book goes on to talk a little bit about the situation here in America with us in Canada, 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War leading to the American Revolution. So you can read this for yourself. Hopefully you know a little bit about the American Revolution and the events leading up to it. I just want to concentrate on something else. Okay, so make sure you read this very carefully. Okay, really what the biggest part of this chapter, and probably the most complex part, is the French Revolution and then the rise of Napoleon. So the French Revolution essentially breaks out in 1789 because of economic issues that France just simply cannot solve. Louis the 14th, then Louis the 15th, and then Louis the 16th had made decisions, had gotten France involved in foreign wars, and they have a terrible tax situation, and as a result, France is in dire economic woes. So when the king can't really solve them, the king's ministers say, look, you've got to call the Estates General. You've got to summon this representative body to start addressing these problems and probably start taxing different. Rather than this representative body going along with the king, the Third Estate, which represented everybody in France who wasn't a landowner and wasn't part of the Catholic Church, the Third Estate, which could represent everybody from the poorest peasant all the way to the richest merchant who just didn't happen to own the land and didn't have a title. So the Third Estate realizes that they are getting the shaft in this arrangement. They want to vote not by estate, which is how the Estates General had always voted, but by individual. As an individual, they believed that the whole Third Estate could take control of the Estates General and change the situation in France and maybe make France's government more representative rather than having an absolute monarch. Too late, Louis XVI is going to try to stop them, and the French Revolution begins. The French Revolution is a very bloody affair. It goes through about 3 stages. The first stage is sort of moderate, okay? But eventually, when they move to strip the king of his powers, and eventually they're going to murder the king, they're going to behead the king, then that's going to lead to the revolution in France turning very violent under the Committee of Public Safety. You have the Reign of Terror that lasts until 1793. So from basically the execution of King Louis in 1793 to the end of the Reign of Terror in 1795, you have this very violent, very bloody revolution going on in France. During this period, France does several things that are really revolutionary. They change from an absolute monarchy to, at one time, really technically a republic, but they never really get that into place fully, to eventually to a military dictatorship under Napoleon. And people think, well, that's not great, but coming from an absolute monarchy to a republic is a huge shift. The other thing is, not only is it a political revolution, but it is a social, cultural, religious revolution. Christianity in France is stripped from its former place. The Catholic Church in France suffers huge property losses and financial losses as a result of the French Revolution. The people who had never voted in France can suddenly vote and participate in the revolution. So you have all sorts of things kind of line up with the French Revolution that are very revolutionary. The French Revolution ends in 1799 when a general named Napoleon Bonaparte will seize power. Napoleon is a child of the Revolution, has been a leader of the French army since really about 1795, when he saved the French government from a uprising in Paris. In 1799, he had been fighting the British in Egypt when he returns back home to take control of France in 1799. And now really rules France for the next few years as a military dictator, and will then go on to become and proclaim himself to be emperor in a few years. Inside of France, or outside of France, the French Revolution has spurred on various things, including a slave rebellion that breaks out in Haiti, led by Toussaint Louverture. Even Napoleon is going to be unable to stop this slave rebellion from breaking out, even though Toussaint Louverture was captured and ends up dying in a French jail. They still can never stop the rebellion, and Haiti is one of the first places in the Western Hemisphere to gain independence from as a Latin American country, following a lot, of course, in our footsteps. Napoleon will, after seizing control of the French government, will really, like I said, become a military dictator. He controls the press. He tries to heal the breach between France and the Catholic Church. But he also will promote a new law code, will try to help France recover from the French Revolution. But in 1804, he will proclaim himself to be emperor. And in the meantime, he is fighting most of Europe and doing a very good job. Napoleon will come closer to many, or really than any, until we get to Adolf Hitler, to taking control of all of Europe. He will invade Spain, invade Austria, invade Prussia. He will invade Russia in 1812, which was a disaster, and leads to his first abdication. He will be exiled to a small island off the coast of Italy, only to return to France and try to rule again, to only be defeated again in in a battle against the British and the Prussians, and at Waterloo, and will then be exiled to the South Atlantic at St. Helena, where he will die. This is a ton of information. So as you work through the French Revolution and Napoleon, make sure that you take notes on this because it is a lot to digest, and this is a big chapter. All right, I'll see you again when we get to chapter 19.